Welcome back everybody for another video over learning decisions. Today we'll be taking a look at integrations in decisions. There are many different designer elements that a designer user can choose to integrate with. The four main ones that we will demonstrate to integrate with are going to be the flows, the rules, the pages, and reports designer. Those are the four main designers that we will demonstrate integrating with. So I'm just going to create a new folder, designer project. We're going to call this integrating with decisions. Add that root. I'm going to click create. First things first, I'm going to create a flow. And it's just going to be a basic flow. It's going to be integrate with flows. And then I'm going to click create right here. And we're going to go into the integration. Now, the first thing you want to be aware of when you configure a configure that makes no sense, configure an integration, you want to make sure that you allow an integration for that flow, rule, or designer element. You can find out that setting on the top right here. And now what I'm going to do is I want to use it as an API service. You have a user interface, we have an API service, you can do it as a webhook. I'm going to do it as an API service. We're going to show using this passing in data, and then we'll also show utilizing it as a UI, because if I have a form in this flow, then I need to integrate with it via the UI, because when I run this flow, it's going to display a form. So we're going to do the first one. So the most common ones we do are get and post. I'll be showing you the post path. The reference type, all this does is say, how do you want to refer to this flow? As you can see on the top of my URL, I have this ID right here. So if I call this URL or call this flow via its integration, if I choose to refer it by ID or path, then it will get me to this flow ID. If I just leave it by path, then let's say I move this flow to a different folder, well then my folder path is invalid. So we most commonly use ID, or we just leave it at ID or path. I'm going to select done. And now since I selected API service, I can view the integration details. And when I view the integration details, you'll see I have some options here that pop up with the get call or the post call. And then it will also show how you want data to be returned by it. There's a couple different authentication methods we have out of the box. You can use the login, which is just the basic login credentials you use to log into decisions. We also have named sessions. So if you configured a named session for more security purposes that take in the user account and kind of hash it with its own unique identifier value, that makes it more secure when you're connecting to it, you can use that. You can use the current user session, the session that's currently logged in right now, or you can specify credentials. The specify credentials is not typically used because what happens with specify credentials is it sends it to the user ID and password into the URL parameter. So that's the thing you have to be aware of when you specify user credentials. It's going to be plain text in the URL. So that's why no one uses this one. This is basically used for testing. So what we're going to do is we're just going to demonstrate running this with the name session. Now, if I want, I could change the data format. So if I was outputting data to this, then I can determine the format I want. But in this case, I'm just testing in the integration. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit test over here, and then I'm going to run the post parameter, and I'm just going to hit run. And you see that it errored out running the start step because when I configured this flow, I did not connect the flow up to the end step. So if I do this and connect this up to the end step, I hit save, and then I run, it will go to the done path because I fixed that flow. All right. Now, what if you want to send data through this API call? Like you're going to call a flow via service and you want to pass in data to it. And you want to be able to use those parameters and then output data to somewhere else. How would we go about that in decisions? Well, whenever you configure a process for sending in data and outputting data, there's two things you have to do. If you want to pass data within the body of the API call, you must configure the inputs. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to configure a flow that just adds two things together. That's it. And so let's say I want to pass in this parameter, the inputs for the add step via the body of a REST call. Well, how would I do that? Well, I'm going to define some inputs. I'm going to say this is first number, and then I'm going to say this is the second number. And this will be a decimal. This will also be a decimal. And I'm going to save this. Right? And then what I want to do is I also want to output the total. So add output. So I'm just going to check the checkbox here just to add a quick output for it. I could have used the show editor and done it that way, but I decided not to do it. So now let's map in those variables into this step. First number goes there, and second number goes there. So now I've created a process that I can call via API and then have the result returned to me. All right, and the output result is going to be a decimal. All right, next step. Let me close this. So that's the flow we're going to integrate with. I'm going to use the same server to call itself. So this may not be your applicable environment where you're integrating with the same server you're logged in as, but the process that I show you will be the same when you're actually calling another decision system. I'm just using my local machine just to call itself so you see the setup of the integration. Okay, so let's go ahead and do this. I'm going to create another folder. We're going to add this as a root folder. And I'm going to say this is going to be my base of operations. I'm going to click create. All right, cool. So now the first thing you want to do, if you want to call decisions as a service or set up any type of external REST integration, is you want to create data types and integration. So you want to left click this right here. And then what you want to do is you want to say, hey, I want to create a type from an XML, JSON, or whatever type you're going to be outputting from that integration call. Remember, I'm going to be outputting the sum of the first two numbers that were added. So what I need to do is I need to go back to my external integrations. I'm just going to refresh this page and see now I have the inputs of first number and then the add one output as the output because I configured the start step to pass the data through here and then the end step to output that data. So I'm going to use this as the admin session as well. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this data right here, this path right here. I'm going to create this, define this as a JSON integration. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say create type from JSON. I'm going to say this is my example output. And then my JSON package is going to be this. Now you may ask, why is there a done to? The reason why there's a done to is because every outcome path of a flow, the done step is named done. So those two things have to be named differently. So to avoid confusion of having the namespace being already taken by the end steps of flows, that's why it's named done to. So I'm going to grab both of these, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to click create. There we go. So now I have my simple flow structure, and we're going to use this for the integration piece. But I have to make sure that I grabbed the output of this here. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create the external integration by going to external services. Like I said, I know mine's not going to be a true external service integration. I'm just going to be calling the same machine that I'm logged in as, but the process that you go through will be the same if you set it up. All right, so I'm going to add a REST endpoint, and I'm going to call this calling decisions via REST. And the service URL is going to be the base portal URL of your local machine. In this case for me, it's going to be this. And you'll see that decisions will try to ping that particular server. And if it can ping it, then you know you are good to go and that you're all set up. And in other environments, let's say if you actually have a Windows OAuth or Windows Auth or use OAuth, then you'll have to configure these things in your environment setup if your decision server is behind any one of these security servers. So since mine isn't, I don't have to configure this. So I'm going to use no authentication, and I'm going to just hit save. Now what I can do is immediately it took me into that folder. So if I go back to my designer folder, what happens is it immediately creates a folder for me. Within that folder, what it allows me to do is it allows me to create methods. So I can right click this folder and add a method. And then when I call this method, this is what I'm actually going to create as a flow step in the Flow Designer. That's what's actually going to be created. So I'm going to call this adding two numbers together. And then I have to give the URL relative to the base. So it's going to be everything after the base portal URL. So I'm going to go to my view integrations and I'm going to grab everything after the base portal URL of the flow I'm trying to integrate with. So for this case, I will be using this URL to this flow. So I need a Control-C to copy this. I'm going to go back to my Decision Studio, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the suffix. Here you see that the base portal URL already has a slash, and then I put the URL relative to base with a slash as well. So what Decisions is saying here is that it's just going to remove one of those slashes. So I'm going to just backspace so I don't have that error pop up, or that warning rather. And after I configure that, I've told it this is the main server you're going to call. I've said this is the URL to get access to the specific flow I want to run. And then I got to configure what type of integration am I doing. I copied the post one. So I'm going to change the HTTP method to post. And then for my content body, I'm going to say that I'm going to specify, not specify. There we go. I'm going to leave it the content as unspecified, and then I'm going to specify below using request variables. Now in your environment, you may have to do a different setup. But in this case, since all I'm doing, I don't need to specify the content, since I'm not passing in JSON and I'm not passing in a composite type. All I'm going to do is just pass in some primitive types. So that's why I'm going to specify it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go back to my integration details. I'm going to copy all this information right here, all of it. And I'm going to Control-C, and then I'm going to Control-V in here. Perfect. Now, if I want someone to be able to send in these as variables and not as static 0 values, I need to configure that. How I configure that is I put brackets and braces next to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say this is brace first number, and then I'm going to do the same thing here. Brace second number. Here we go. And then you can see where it says flow step variables from body. Decisions already has that set up, as you can see here. If you didn't do this correctly, then these variables won't pop up here. But if you did it correctly, the variables will pop up here. Then the output type. The output type, we could leave as raw, but I'm going to let you know why we don't leave this as raw. So now I'm going to call that method that I created. So call my method. And every time I create an integration with a flow step, or integration in decisions, I will find them in integration, and I'll find them in the REST service category, named after what I called the main decisions system. And I called this calling decisions via REST. And there's my method, adding two numbers together. And so I'm going to drag this over, and notice I have my first number and my second number right here. So now what I can do is I'm going to pass in these two numbers, and then you'll see my decisions instance take those two numbers in there and run it. There's also an error path, so if there's any type of HTTP error that gets thrown, it will show you the error message and all the information that you'll need to troubleshoot it. So that's also very helpful. All right, so let's go ahead and run this. I'm going to just set these as constant values. I'm going to set these as constant values of 5 and 5. So now we should see the results should return 10 because 5 plus 5 is 10. So I'm going to debug this, start the debug, and we see it went down the done path. And then when I look at the output data, you shall see that the number that I outputted was 10. But notice that it is a serialized string. And what we mean by serialized string is that it's not accessible. It's just one long piece of text data, which makes it hard to be able to troubleshoot or to map into an Excel value or what have you, or any other storage location. So let's say you want to make this deserialized. The way I'm going to show you guys how to do it is creating that type. Remember how I created this done type? Well, now what I can do is I can attach. So I'm going to go back to my method. And I am going to create that output on it. So when I do that, so I'll go here, I'm going to edit this method. And then on the output type, I'm going to set it, select data type, and then I'm going to pick that type that I just created, which is recents, and it should be example output. So I'm going to select example output, click OK, and then I'm going to go back into that flow that I just created, that I called my method. And now when I debug this, you will see, when I look at the outputs of the execution, that now it is deserialized automatically for me. And I can view and manipulate that output later on in the flow because I have deserialized it. So you could deserialize it in the flow designer as well. There's JSON deserialize, so let me type in deserialize. Deserialize, oops, I can't spell, realize. And we have JSON, XML, and XSD. So I could have used these steps to deserialize it into that type. However, I didn't want to because it's best practice to always attach the output type to your REST call. And that's why I did it that way. I created that type via JSON and integration. And then after I did that, I ran the flow, and you can see that my output was deserialized. Now let's take a look at creating an integration with a decisions rule. A lot of this will be very similar. We'll repeat a lot of the same steps. Let's go ahead and show that. So I'm going to close out of this. I'm going to go back into my integrating with decisions folder. And now I'm going to create a rule. And this rule is going to have inputs as well. So I'm going to say this is my integrate with me rule and create. I'm going to set up some input data, and I'm going to define those inputs. I'm going to say, let's say I want to determine if the, email address is a certain email address. And now I'm going to say, let's say save, close. And then I'm going to say, is the email address equal to, and then I'm just going to make it simple, admin@decisions.com. And we're going to turn a simple true or false. Now I could change the output to say, hey, new output data and return a number or whatever I want. But all I'm going to show here is just passing in and integrating with a rule. Notice it's the exact same setup like integrating with a flow. Go to the top right, API service. We're going to leave all this the same. configure HTTP methods, get and post, and then click done. And then I'm going to view the integration details from that. And you can see that in the post, it says, hey, what's the string value to expect here? And so now if I test this, go to post, and then I'm going to say, let's say I can test it here and I go run. It returned false because email address string value does not equal admin@decisions.com. If, however, I typed admin@decisions.com here, and then I ran, notice that it ran true. Okay, I'm going to use this as the admin session, so that's what I'm going to pass this in as. That's what we're going to do. And ID, we're going to keep that there. And hello looks good. So let me change my rule to output some data, just so we can say, let's say append some text. So I'll say, let's pick this email address. Pick, and then we're going to append text to it and say, return false, no, is not admin. And then I'm going to append text here for this one. And then pick, and then I'm going to say, is admin. All right, so we can see it output some data. And now when I integrate with it, let's refresh this integration page. I'll have some data that outputs. So I'll have the email address, the default output data, and then the email address, and then the string value that I output there. All right, so let's go create this as an admin session. And then I'm going to create another integration. And how do we do this? We do this by going create data types and integration, external services, add REST service. And I'm going to say this is call my rule. And then I'm going to pass in the same details. So my base portal URL is this. And you see I got a 200 response. I remember I don't need to configure these things because this is specific to my environment. In your environment, you may need to. I'm going to save this integration. And then I'm going to create a method. So I'm going to add method to service. And this one's going to be is email admin. Is going to be the name of the service. I'm going to grab the rest of this URL. And then I'm going to place it here. It's going to be post. It's going to be specified request body. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this information, place this here, and then the string value, this is going to be by a variable, so email address, and then email address is there. I'm just going to leave the output type raw. I'm not going to go and create another type to show you guys how to deserialize. I already showed that in the flow integration portion. I'm just going to show the setup of integrating with the rule. And then I'm going to click OK. So now that I have this method, now what I can do is I can go back to integrating with decisions. Oops, that's not the one I wanted. I can go back to my base of operations. I can say, hey, call my method. And I'm actually going to select a different one, integration, internal services, or not internal services, REST service. Call my rule is another one. Is rule admin. I'm going to drag this over. I'm going to connect to this one. Move this one out of the way. Select done over here. And select done right here. Perfect. And now I'm just going to pass in. So let's say I'm going to pass in test@decisions.com. This should throw an error and throw false. So what we're going to do here is now we debug, view input outputs. And there we go. It appended that text. Result name default output false. So it gave me that output false. And then email address output, test decisions is not admin. I can change that to show admin@decisions.com. Oops. Decisions.com. And then it will return true. See, result name, right here is the result, output true, email address, admin@decisions.com is admin. So there you go. So that's how I have integrated with a rule and a flow, both passing in variables via the request body of a post call, and then viewing the output, one that's deserialized on the output side, and one that is not, one that is serialized on the output data, as you see here on the screen. So that's integrating with the decisions flow and rule designer. Now, you may be saying, hey, why did you create another integration when all you could have done is create another method instead of passing in and creating a whole new category? And you'd be correct. What I could have done is, instead of the call my rule folder, I'm actually going to delete this service. So we're going to delete that. And then what I could have done is I could have gone into this one here. I could have added the method that I wanted to add here and grab the integration details for the rule and put it here. But call my rule, right? And all that would have done is, if I went back into the call my method flow, now both of these methods are within the same category as each other. So if I go to REST services, calling decisions, now I have call my rule and add two numbers together. So that's the difference. One had its own category, the other one didn't. So in this situation, it would have been best if I just ran it this way, because then I don't have to create the data types and integration and do all that stuff. I just did it to show you guys. Okay, so that is a rule. So I integrated with a flow and I integrated with a rule. Now let's say I have a UI element within my flow. So let's say I'm going to create, this is going to be show integrate with UI create. So now let's say I have a form. Hopefully I can create a really simple form. I'm going to pick, I think I have a simple form, recents. Perfect, let's use my example. Pass the button here. I'm going to create some test data, test. 1, 2, 3. And let's say we'll leave this as selected data. I'm going to say ignore. Okay, so let's say I want to integrate with this flow, but this flow has a UI element. It has a form. How do I integrate with that? Well, instead of configuring the API service, what we're going to configure is a user interface, which means that when a user calls this URL, it's going to appear with a form on their browser. So they just have a link to navigate to, and it opens up a form, and they run this process. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, user interface. We're going to do it by ID or path, or you can pick one or the other. And then we're going to click done. And then what we'll do is we'll view this integration setup. And now notice that I can do it by login, name session, or however way you want to. And then you see this URL appear here. And now what I can do is I can give myself this URL. I don't have to use the create data types and integrations and create a whole step to run this. While I could, I don't need to. Right here, I can just pass this. I'm going to show you guys right now. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to open up a new browser, right? Separate browser. And I'm just going to paste that URL in here. And what's going to happen is now I'm looking at that form that I just created. I told it to go over the entire screen. And so now I can interact with this form and click the button done. And then it says the flow has completed once I run this. So you can, in a use case of this, let's say you need to give your customer a form to fill out, yet you don't want them to log into the decision system. I can say, hey, I'm going to run this flow via user interface, and you can give them this so that they can trigger it without logging in and without having to go through the workflow catalog and finding this particular item they want to run. All they have to do is, here's a link, click this link, go run it. And you can do that here easily. There's different display options. So let's say if you want a background, you can add a background or a border or shadow or spacings. You can configure however way you want it. If you want it centered, if you want it maximized, you can specify how big you want the form. So that was over the entire browser. Let's say I just want to do it by 1000 by 1000. And so now if I run this form, notice those values are in the URL, size X1000, size Y1000. And so now if I run this form, place it here, notice that it's a 1000 by 1000. And I have the scroll bars to allow me to navigate around that. Test 2, hit the button, flow completed. So those will give you further additional options if you want. If you want to embed this into a certain place, whether by direct URL or a website or on SharePoint, if that's your use case, you can definitely do that. Auto restart, I believe, don't quote me on this, I believe, let's do it. So if I do auto restart, I believe once I complete the form, it will just show you another form as well. So let's go ahead and test that theory out. Test 2, flow complete. Nope, okay. I'll research that. I'm not sure what the auto restart configuration does. I have not used it. I've left it blank. So in most use cases, I'm going to presume you'll leave it blank. But I'll put a comment in this video of what auto restart's supposed to do, or in the post editing, I'll comment right now of what I found out it does. So you'll get the answer to that one. All right, so that's integrating with flows and rules, and then showing you the user interface capability with the Decisions UI here. All right. Now I'm going to show how to integrate with the Decisions Reports Designer. So in my base of operations folder, my designer project folder, I'm just going to create a really quick report. It's going to report over the accounts data source in the system, accounts data source report. And then I'm going to show you how to integrate with this one. Now, integrating with reports does one of two things. It allows you to, one, download the report data as an Excel, which I'll demonstrate. And then the second thing you can do with it is you can integrate it with the user interface. You would get a UI code, and if you navigate to that URL with that UI code, it will display the report designer in the web browser. So we'll go ahead and demonstrate that. Account data source, I'm just going to grab the email, and we'll do the created on. Let's see, created on and created by. I'll just search by created on, created by, perfect. And then, just like I configured the flow and rule designer, your integrations for version 7 will be located on the top right corner of your screen. And I'm going to say I want to integrate this as an API service first. I'm going to configure the HTTP methods. I'm going to select post. And I'm going to select post. I can even do the get call. And I'm going to click done. I'm going to view the integration. And let me make sure I first save this. Save this report, and then I'm going to close that integration browser, and let's take a look at it again. All right, so now I can have my login options. I'm going to pick my name session that I've already created, and then what I'm going to do is I can then test this get call. So I'm going to run the post, and so if I run this call, what happens is I get these rows of, it's just showing you that it's got the rows of email addresses. This is what happens when you just hit the test here. But if I grab this URL here, and let's say I want to copy and paste this here, it will show it in the browser in the same way that you have the rows. So let's switch it up a little differently. So let me use the post call. And let's call it via post. So via post, it does the exact same way. So there's a way that if I use the APIs, there we go. So you can do it return by JSON, and that's what it was doing. But what you can also do is in the API service settings, you can also tell it to output an Excel or a PDF file. This way, when you run it, it will download that file. So I'm going to change that. I'm going to hit view, And now if I just grab this URL and then I open up another browser tab and then I control paste, notice I have my counts data source Excel that I can open up. And in my Excel, I'm going to move it over to this screen. You'll see that I have the data that was displayed in the report in an Excel format. You can also do it in a PDF if you prefer that, but that's one way, that's one of the output settings you can use to integrate with reports. All right, we're done with that. I'm going to remove that. We're going to switch the API service settings. And now instead of using the post call or the get call, we're going to create a UI code. And what the UI code does is it just displays the report designer in this format, where it looks like you're just running the report designer, but it displays in the web browser. So let's go ahead and do that. So what I'm going to do is you're going to want to left click the API service blue text here, and you want to change the integration type to user interface. Now notice when I change it to user interface, there is no option for output because the data is going to be output in the browser. So that's why there's no option to say, hey, I want this to be output as Excel, I want this to be output as JSON or any of that stuff. Because all we're doing is we're viewing the dashboard via the browser, and it's going to show, not the dashboard, the report via the browser here. So when I click view here, I'm going to get that code. And I can just click open URL. It's going to open up another browser. And there you can see the report designer here that's displaying the report on a browser window. And so now a user can integrate with this or view this data without having to log into Decisions. They just need to be able to navigate to this URL. So that's the use of this one. So let's close this. And that's integrating with the reports designer. Only API service and user interface, and you get a URL, and it will display over the entire browser. Okay, let's do this. What I'm going to do is let's create a page, and I'm going to create a dashboard. So let's say this is going to be my accounts page. I'm going to drag over my report viewer. We're going to use the accounts port that I just created in the last example. And what we're going to do now is I'm going to drag a label. That's what I want. So it looks like a dashboard. Now this is going to be a very disgusting design dashboard. I'm sure you guys can create a prettier one than the one I'm going to, but I'm just going to use this for illustrative purposes for integration. Accounts dashboard, woohoo, exclamation point. And we'll spread this out so it's on one line. All right, now what I can do is notice how in the page designer there is no integration for this, right? So I can't integrate with pages directly because it's not attached to a dashboard or what we call a decisions folder. So how we integrate with a page in decisions is we attach it to a normal folder. So I'm going to create a normal folder. And this is going to be my accounts dashboard folder, accounts dashboard folder. And then I'm going to apply my page to this folder, page/dashboard, pick page, and then I'm going to select the accounts page. So now I have successfully created a dashboard. I can see this here, and notice that I have this one here. Now my report's not showing, so let's go ahead and let's debug that. Let's see why. So if I go to my account data source report, okay, cool, I got data here. I must not have picked that thing, or I deleted it. That's probably what happened, is I deleted it from my dashboard or from my page. All right, save this, close this, and let's go back to our dashboard folder here. Good. This is what it should look like. So let's say this is my cool dashboard. Let's say it was really cool. It was designed in a fascinating, intriguing way, and I had some cool CSS on it. And I want to display this to an end user. How do I display this as an integrated designer? What I do is I go to the folder that is attached to. So to integrate with pages, I have to go to the folder that it's attached to, right click it. I need to go to manage, and you see at the bottom here, I can integrate with it, and I can view the integration details. So that's essentially how you integrate with Pages. It's not really the page designer or the dashboard. It's essentially the folder that the page is on. And remember, a dashboard is a page on top of a normal folder. So in reality, what you're integrating with is the dashboard, not the specific page designer itself, even though the page designer is in that dashboard. So it's kind of a little, it's interesting to understand, but in a nutshell, if you want to integrate with a page, you want to first attach it to a folder, create a dashboard, and integrate with the folder that the page is attached to. So integrate with a dashboard. Now I click on View Integration Details, and then I'm just going to pick my name session right here. And then what I can do is I can grab this URL. I can say, hey, I can open the URL here to test it. And then now it would take you to that specific area of the dashboard. Or I can open this up and do it this way. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Let's go ahead and back into the integration details. So let me copy the whole URL. And there you go, and you can integrate with it. Now, the reason why it's not, it's still in the studio is because I haven't made this dashboard available on the end user perspective. So what I need to do is I need to say, hey, we're going to just make this easier. I'm going to move this folder to root. So I have my accounts dashboard folder here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to manage and say, hey, I want this to be on the user portal visibility show. All right. Because I want this to be viewable in the end user portal if someone was looking at it. So now let's grab move this here. No, I did not want to favorite that, unfavorite that. Now let's grab the integration details here. The integration details, and we're going to grab this URL and open it up here. So it looks like we need to configure this a little bit more to get it to integrate with on the portal. So let's do this. Let's switch to the portal here. I'm going to switch to here. Vision, set look and feel. All right, let's see. Sending details. Let's go back into here. Integration, you view the details. I'm going to say, let's do integration. Let's do display settings. Chrome equals off. There we go. That's what I was looking for. Chrome equals off. And we're going to leave this as HTML. We're going to do it by ID. And then we open up the URL. Perfect. That's what I was looking for. So I just forgot to add the and Chrome equals off. So this way a user can just navigate to this dashboard and view it, and they won't know that they're using decisions because all they're seeing is just a dashboard full of stuff. So that's how you integrate the crap out of decisions. We've talked about how you integrate with the flows designer and how you can pass data in the body and outside and output that data somewhere else. We talked about in rules how you can integrate with rules and how you just view the integration details thereof. We talked about reports, how you can integrate with just the report via the user interface or just the API service. And then finally, we rounded it off by talking about how you integrate with dashboards. And how you do that is you go to manage, you integrate with the folder, and then you make sure that Chrome equals off on the display settings here to have that dashboard display without having the Decision Studio or portal being viewed there. So that's the video of making decisions. I'll see you guys next time.